Hi, I am here with Kraen Hansen, program committee member at reactCon, a React Native event at Next App devCon Berlin. Kraen, hi, welcome.
Hi, nice to have you,
Yeah,
or nice to have me, sorry.
yeah. So Kraen, when I look at your journey, it's quite exciting. Like 8 years at MongoDB, and now you are at ElevenLabs. You went from databases to AI voice. Well, that's really interesting. So, what's the connection between your current job and your previous job?
So I believe I've been building in public and in the open for about, I believe in even before Realm and MongoDB, so it's like about 14 years now. So before joining MongoDB, I did some like a digital agency, and we helped organizations use and drive open source projects. And then I was building at Realm, MongoDB, also in the open, and now I'm building these developer experiences and SDKs again at ElevenLabs. So I think something about building in public, building in the open, building open source. It's one theme that's been throughout my career, and then also building cross-platform recently with Realm for about I believe 7.5 years, and then now also building universal supporting the browser, supporting React Native, other platforms with ElevenLabs.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. So you mentioned about universal libraries, which sounds like you write code once and it runs everywhere across the web and the mobile platforms such as Android or iOS. So for the React Native developers watching this, why should they care about universal libraries?
Yeah, so when you're writing an app that uses a universal library, you also get an opportunity to write a universal app. So being able to reuse code, the code that's interfacing with this library, you can also potentially reuse that across different runtimes, platforms. So building for a mobile database, reusing that code base when you build for, a mobile, not a database. I don't know why I said that. But when you're building for a mobile platform, and then you can also ship that to a browser potentially, right? And other places as well, cloud functions or other runtimes. So I think when you're building an app on universal libraries, you also get to build a universal app. I think that's the most outcome. I think for there's also something about apps using libraries that are universal. These libraries get to potentially benefit from being able to be very thoroughly tested on one platform that has a great developer experience, and then reusing that very well tested code across other platforms as well, where it might be a little more difficult to run tests. So there's something about the stability and like the potentially also the performance optimizations that might come from something that's thoroughly tested, thoroughly profiled across, and reusing that across multiple runtimes.
Ah, okay. So I am assuming that, when you build a universal library in React Native that works across multiple platforms, you must be dealing with a lot of platform specific differences and APIs, right? So what's the most annoying platform specific thing that bothers you when you try making that code work everywhere?
I guess it's like these half-baked spec compliant implementations where you realize that at some point in the implementation, the developers just like they got their problem solved and then they didn't implement the rest of the specification. So we had like a non-compliant fetch implementation for some time in the React Native ecosystem, not supporting text streaming, for example. And that was a difficulty until we started doing more agentic or LLM-based stuff, and we wanted and needed more streaming. Then that got solved, right? But that's one example. You think that you're basing your implementation on something spec compliant, and then there might be like small subtle differences or basically bugs that haven't been found before you use it. That's a bit annoying, I guess. But then having your universal library being able to implement a test, and you can see that this actually passes on all the other different runtimes, but this specific one has an issue, also gives you an opportunity to discover that. Um, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, sounds like a lot of work. So after when you address those issues, right? So while building the React Native Universal Library, how do you actually decide what code stays shared versus what needs to be platform specific? Is there any simple way to know that, or is there any specific framework to decide that?
I guess it's you can say it depends on how confident or how much you know about the platform you're implementing for. And I would say if you're like completely new to the platform, there is definitely value in just keeping them separate and trying to hit the roadblocks in a simple code base that's not universal, because then you get to have like a really good direct developer experience with that platform without having the cost of the abstraction of having it universal. But I believe you also, at the same time, I mean, you can do like a deep dive, like a slice through the platform and like really get yourself convinced that this can actually work on the specific platform you're implementing for. But then be prepared to also take a step back and potentially redo some of that and reuse and consolidate basically into a more universal code base. It's more for like it will help you get to a platform faster potentially, like when you have an existing universal code base. But at the same time, it might also be a hindrance, right? I would say once you have a good universal code base, definitely try to keep as much shared as possible and only do whatever is platform specific. And like the only thing you should have platform specific should be the things that are definitely platform specific. And be prepared to also have some kind of like cost of basically refactoring and moving stuff around as you're building.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. So, like I was looking at one of your talk at which you delivered at at a React Native conference about Node API. So I'm just curious, like how does that fit into this whole picture of building universal library in this React Native ecosystem?
So I need to caveat this with Node API, the support in React Native is still, it needs a pull request merged into Hermes to be like fully out there and readily available, I would say, for the average app developer. So right now you need a fork of Hermes to build with the Node API on React Native. But it does have like a potential promise in the future, I would say, where you're able to build not just, I would say, universal JavaScript, but also start having other languages involved, like C, C++, Rust, other more native languages that you can then publish, build and publish add-ons, what we would call native modules for multiple runtimes and environments, specifically Node.js, also React Native, and then a browser as well, with the same shared code base, native code base, which is, I believe, for some use cases, for some libraries, would be really, really awesome. And the developer experience of having the ability to do code generation out of the box for specifically Rust, for example, is a huge developer improvement. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so like it sounds like you have been around Universal Library for almost a decade between your previous job at MongoDB and now at ElevenLabs. So I'm just curious to know, right? I mean, what's the hardest lesson you have learned from your Realm days at MongoDB that you are applying now at ElevenLabs, which is an exclusive AI voice company?
So I started at ElevenLabs about a month ago. So there's probably some learnings that I haven't yet found that I actually can apply. I imagine that some of the stuff that I worked on at Realm and MongoDB was probably a little closer to the native side of things, where most of the ElevenLabs SDKs are around WebSocket and WebRTC connections. So it's basically potentially like a little higher in the stack. But I do believe like just this thing about at Realm, for example, like diving in, doing Gradle configuration, pod specs for Cocoa pods, like just different like Xcode projects, and just being able to dive into a native code base without fear, I would say, is one thing. I don't know if it's a skill more than just like an approach and like not having too much fear. And I think that's something many, I would say, React developers coming to React Native is also something they can practice, basically getting their big boy pants on and diving into the native code base without too much fear. I think, or big girls' pants for that matter.
Yeah, definitely. So, as a program committee member of reactCon, you will soon be reviewing React Native CFPs at the conference, right? The submissions you will get. So, if somebody wants to submit a talk on Universal Library or SDK design, what would you like to see in those submission that could help React Native developers attending this event?
So I think it is a little hard because native, like basically library authoring and developing libraries is not for everyone. Like it's not something that everyone does, right? And I realize that I am also representing a niche within the community in that regard. Many of the people coming to the conference are app developers, first and foremost. But there are people in the audience that needs to pick libraries, right? And when they have something that they can steer from, like as they're picking a library, if they have vocabulary, if they know what are the different trade-offs that an author of a library can make in terms of making it more universal or less universal, I think just having that understanding, intrinsic understanding and motivation around, like I understand why this is something that a library author wanna author and use, and how it can benefit me, basically. So like coming back to the talks, I think some talks about maybe like the practices around like how to actually author these things and what the trade-offs are when you're approaching it. I think it is super interesting, but also more potentially high level like terms. I would say like how, yeah, exactly. Like maybe potentially comparing different options for a specific use case. So that would be somebody building an app. They tried one thing, they tried another thing, and they landed on this third thing. And they are explaining like why and the trade-offs that they made as they chose the library. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I think we had a wonderful conversation so far, and I think we should move on to our next segment of this interview, which is would you rather rapid fire round. So I will give you some impossible choices to make. Just pick one fast, okay? So just whatever comes to your mind. Yeah. So would you rather build one library for 10 platforms with 80% code sharing, or build three separate libraries perfectly optimized for their platforms?
That's a good question. I think I would go with the first option, like of having supporting multiple platforms. I think if the option is to build something very optimized, I imagine performant for those specific few platforms. And I think that's because in many cases we tend to premature optimize, right? So if you try to get out on 10 different platforms, you can double down on the things that actually have performance issues or get traction. That's also the other thing. So like investing broad and then doubling down on where it actually matters.
Okay. Would you rather have perfect TypeScript types but slow runtime performance, or blazing fast code with terrible type safety?
Yeah. I don't believe in choices like that. I would probably, again, like primitive optimization is in the root of like these. I would say the TypeScript types, because the other things can come later. At the same time, I would maybe like a split. Can I do a split where I like 10% the hot path I would not have good types, and then the broadness I would have a great type. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyways, it's a rapid fire. Would you rather write documentation for 8 hours straight, or debug a platform specific crash with no stack trace?
I've done the latter, I would say. I would definitely go into like a platform specific crash with no stack trace. That's it sounds like great fun.
Okay. So if you had a magic wand for React Native, would you rather add default Node API support or web workers?
I would go for the Node API support, because then we can use that to implement the web workers.
Nice. So would you rather have a library with perfect technical docs with zero code samples, or hundreds of code samples but no written docs?
I would say, oh, that's a great question. I think I'm maybe a little atypical there. I like to read like the more foundational, the fundamentals, the philosophy behind something, and then I can figure out how to use it myself. So I would say probably the docs and no examples.
Okay.
But I mean, in this LLM world, right? If I'm using something to help me generate code, that's not the right answer.
Yeah. Yeah, things are changing. Would you rather work in a monorepo with 100 packages or manage 100 separate repos?
Monorepo, anytime. I think
Wow.
investing in that developer experience, you can do it really, really well nowadays. And it just cuts down on your mental overhead of figuring out how these other 100 separate repos are all different.
So last one, would you rather only build for web forever or only build for native mobile forever?
Oh, no. I can't. Um, I would pick a third option.
Third option. There is no third option.
I think native mobile has some really interesting potential, and I mean, let's go for that. That's not what most people would pick.
Yeah, mobile forever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, anyways, yeah, so that was really perfect, Crane. So, thanks, Crane, for joining us in this interview. If anyone watching is working on universal libraries, cross platform SDKs, or that kind of stuffs, we really want to hear from you. Submit your talk at reactCon, a React Native event at Next App devCon Berlin. The link to Submit CFP is on our website. See you all in Berlin. Bye bye and thanks, Crane. Bye.
Bye bye.